Okay, bonjour Alain.
Bonjour.
It's great to see you again. As usual, it's always insightful to speak with you, and we are very excited that you will enlighten us about Europe and the Middle East, France and the Middle East, as well as what is happening in France that is of interest to people researching and studying the Middle East. Um, and again, first of all, welcome. This is a recording by the Arab Studies Institute. My name is Bassam Haddad. I'm, as usual, very honored to be speaking with you. We have a long history. I spoke with you first in 2005, and we are very much aware of the gravity you have in producing knowledge on the Middle East here in France, not least, of course, with your history with Le Monde, as well as your recent project, or relatively recent project, Orient 21, that is a source we value highly at both Jadaliya and the Arab Studies Institute, as well as many others around the world. And I understand that you have a new form of expansion, which you can talk about a little bit. But first, let me just ask you if you can share with us what are your thoughts on the current situation in terms of the very broad and general topic of Europe and the Middle East, with some attention to French policy towards the hot topics that are taking place, whether it has to do with Iran or the idea of the US and the Middle East having decreased relations, if you will, because of the gradual US disengagement.
First, when we speak about Europe and foreign policy of Europe, we must know that there is no European united foreign policy. You know, the foreign policy in Europe, to have a position, you must have the consensus of 27 countries, meaning that it's mostly impossible, and especially impossible if you want to do something. So there are some general positions in the European Union, but not active as a global actor. It is an economic global actor. They have many, especially with North Africa, but also with some Mediterranean country like Egypt or Lebanon. There are some important economic relations, but on the political side, I think it's not a global policy. You have different policy from Germany, from England, even if now it's not European Union, and of France. In the last period, the French policy in the Middle East has been based on the fight against terrorism, especially after what we call the Arab Spring failed in most of the Arab countries. The idea was that we were returning to a normal policy of the French government for at least 20 years, that democracy was not for the Arab world, it was too complicated, it brought civil wars in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya, and stability was important, but with a new dimension that stability was important for fighting against terrorism and fighting against immigration. And from this moment, the bilateral relation of France has been without taking in account completely the question of human rights. And we have seen it recently with the visit of Macron to the Gulf country. He went to Emirates, to Saudi Arabia, and to Qatar, and mostly to sell arms, and to sell arms which we know are used, for example, in the Yemen war, and to consolidate, the leadership. He was the first, Emmanuel Macron was the first big, if you want, Western leader who met with Mohammed bin Salman. The justification was that Saudi Arabia is an important country. One of the justifications was that he tried to mend fences between Saudi Arabia and Lebanon, and you know that France is quite involved in the Lebanese affair. But at the end of the story is it's giving credit to Mohammed bin Salman as a normal leader of the Middle East. And one of the reasons put, as I said, was the fight against terrorism. This explains in some way the way we support LCC regime, which is very strange because I mean I don't see in any way LCC fighting against terrorism, but this was a pretext given to sell them Rafale, as if Rafale is a way to fight. I mean, it's a mean to fight against terrorism. We have consolidated this regime, and today, with especially with the Emirates, we say that we share the fight, a common fight against terrorism. And I don't see any common fight between Emirates and France. I mean, we know that the relation between Emirates and some of the terrorist group in Yemen, for example, or in Libya are very strong. So, but this is one of the pretexts. And the second pretext, which is very important today, especially as you know, we will enter a presidential election, which are in France the most important election in April and May, and it is the fight against immigration. Immigration is becoming a central topic of the French policy, and we want, and we try at least to have the different southern Mediterranean countries being a kind of protection against migration from Africa. And so we support the Egyptian regime, and we support also North African regime, and we ask them to serve as a how do you say, barrage, a dam against migration. But you know, at the same time, France is an important player in the Middle East, especially by selling arms. I don't think we have very much capacity to change the policy of the different countries. For example, there was, after the visit of Macron, there was a phone call between Mohammed bin Salman, and the Lebanese prime minister. But till now, I mean, the boycott of Saudi Arabia of Lebanese goods has not stopped. So the problem is, when you look at it, it's what's fantastic is the contradiction between a general speech about human rights, France as a symbol of democracy, of since the French Revolution, etc., and our support to very dictatorial regime. To be frank, I mean, I know that no country can have a relation based only on human rights. If you make it, who is, I mean, we will stop help. Will we stop relation with China? But there are limits. And the problem for this government, there is no limits. There is no limit. And I think especially, I mean, which is very shocking in France, is support to the LCC regime, which, I mean, you have 60,000 political prisoners, you have no free press, no independent political party, you have you can go in jail for any pretext, etc. And at the same time, we have received LCC here. We have decorated him from the highest decoration in France, etc. And this is problematic. It is problematic also because it's a way of discredited. I mean, you know, there is many questions about democracy, human rights, pluralism. Is it a good model, and etc. But when Western, a country like France, at the same time, made this relation with dictatorship, and at the same time violated all our what we say about democracy and human rights, in some way, it goes in the hand of the people in the Middle East who are against the democracy. You say, okay, the West is speaking about democracy, but look how they behave. And this is, it's weakened the people who in the Middle East are fighting for democracy, because they say, look, they are speaking of democracy, but look on the ground what they are doing.
Thank you. I want to get back to the domestic issues a bit later, but I would like to ask a couple of questions about the potential space that might open up based on all the speculation about the U.S. retreat from the region, which I think is being made too much of in many ways, because there are limits to how much the U.S. can pull from the region, at least anytime soon. But is there a space for France to intervene to fill some of the vacuum, even if the vacuum is smaller than what a lot of people are saying? Is there some space for France to intervene in relation to other European countries in the Middle East? Or is this not going to have an impact on French policy in the Middle East?
I agree with you. I mean, the retreat of the United States from the region is should be taken with some. It's not. I mean, it's not as big as it is said. I mean, Middle East will stay an important region. I mean, the Americans have 50,000 soldiers. They have their marines. They have bases, and they will not stop. What will stop? I mean, at least for the next decade, I don't think United States will be involved on the ground in any war in the Middle East. But what is important is that many of the actors of the region feel that there is a vacuum and they should act on their own. And when you look at the map today, it's very strange. I mean, you have Erdogan, who is making relations with the United Arab Emirates. He's opening to Israel. You have the Emirates who are opening to Iran, and even Saudi Arabia is opening. Everybody understands that they are on their own, not completely, but in some ways they are on their own, and they try to manage. And making a very strange, I mean, because you don't have any more alliance in the sense you have, I mean, Soviet Union against United States, or even the camp of resistance against other. Now it's not like this. I mean, Emirates have opened to Syria. Syria is now will be probably accepted again in the Arab League. So it is an opportunity for any country. But first of all, I mean, no, after the American experience in Afghanistan and Iraq, not only the American, but I think most of the European countries are not ready to send troops and to be involved in wars and in conflict in the Middle East. So how they can maneuver is they have space, but unfortunately now, I mean, you see this page more on selling arms. It's clear that, I mean, the American has lost a little about it, and so France, Russia is selling more arms. It shows that different army want, I mean, different countries want to have many assurances, if you want. But on the ground of what policy and how to change things on the ground politically, I think first, I don't see France having many possibilities. And they are not active and they don't have a plan for the Middle East. And also the plan for the Middle East is very complicated. What plan? I mean, when you see the question of Iran. But two more things. On Iran, I mean, the French position is it's not very important in my opinion, but it's not very positive. I mean, Macron has made a declaration saying that the agreement must be extended to Israel and the Gulf states, meaning there will be no agreement. But this is an old policy. I mean, the French has been very anti-Iranian for a long time, but I don't think it will change the American position in one way or another. The other question we discussed many times, I think, is Israel-Palestinian conflict. And now we have a real change of policy, not in the principle. In the principle of most of European countries and France are for a two-state solution. But first, it's clear that there is no two-state solution. But on the ground, there is a support to Israel which has never been so important from France. There is military relations, security relations, economic relations, political relations, without taking into account completely the Palestinian question. The French government say, okay, we are condemning the colonization, or we are still saying very clearly that we are for a two-state solution. But on the ground, it doesn't change anything for Israel, and it doesn't change anything for the Palestinians. And for me, at least, the Palestinian question is a central question for all the people of the Middle East. And the fact that France has changed from, let's say, 20 years ago, it has deteriorated French policy in the Middle East. I mean, the image of France which was, 40 years ago, so positive after de Gaulle, after the recognition of the PLO, etc., now is getting more like any other Western country. I don't think it's positive.
All right, let's move a little bit to the domestic front. I would like to ask you about a couple of things, including whether the country, France, or its political system, how was it affected by the recent, and I say recent to me in the past several years, recent movement to the right, almost globally, and certainly in Europe and the United States. Considering there's been a new election in the United States a year ago, still there has been a movement to the right. How has France been affected by it, and how might it affect the elections on the one hand, and how might these issues affect questions of immigration and questions of migration, and then issues that have to do with internal politics in France in relation to Arabs and Muslims and other minorities or other migrants?
First of all, there is a turn to the right, but perhaps it's not so important in Europe as it was said. For example, the election in Germany have brought the Social Democrats in the government and a marginalization of the extreme right. The same thing in Italy, the same thing in Norway. So there are a move to the right, but I want to stress that it's not inevitable and it's not evident. And I think it will depend on each country and its history. In France, the movement is bigger than in any other country. Now, for the first time, you have two fascist candidates to the presidential election. Together, they get between 25 and 30% of the votes. More dangerous is the ideas developed by this country, these people, Marine Le Pen and Éric Zemmour. Éric Zemmour is a polemist brought up by the television and who is really, really very anti-Muslim. This idea has penetrated all the political camps. The right completely. Now we have a right-wing candidate for the presidential election, and she's buying all these ideas. And this is one of the most preoccupying things it's not new, but little by little, the idea of the extreme right, which are very marginalized, has become central. The idea that we have the grand remplacement, the big change, that the French population was replaced by migrants, mostly. This was 30 years ago, it was really fascist. Only some fascist group will accept this idea. Now it's brought by many of the political parties, but not only right-wing, even socialist party in some way. So this is very preoccupying, even if the extreme right don't win the election, and I don't think they will win the presidential election, but it will have consequences. One of the questions is, why is this so strong in France if you compare it to Great Britain, to Italy, and also to old
Austria,
but even I think it's linked with our colonial history, and a colonial history which is not finished. We have seen the referendum in Nouvelle-Calédonie. We have island in Réunion, Martinique, Guadeloupe. We are still a colonial power, and we still haven't succeeded to get rid of this history. To get rid meaning to discuss openly and to understand what happened and why it was like this and what was the prices of this colonial history. And this has concentrated mostly about Algeria war, and it's still, we are 60 years after the end of the war. It's still a very, very sensitive subject in France. And we are not able to, to open a frank discussion with French history about colonialism. And I think it's very different from Great Britain, for example. I think Great Britain has done much better work, even if there are also, of course, crimes, etc. And this is creating a condition where you have a return of an ideology which was present when we were in Algeria. We're still in Algeria. The idea that we are facing the Muslims, that they are going to invade us, that all this is now, I mean, I spoke about le grand remplacement. This is becoming common knowledge. I mean, saying people, oh yes, they are coming from Africa, from North Africa, etc. They are colonizing us. It's Arabs who are colonizing us. And this is very, I mean, the reason for this, of course, one of the reasons is the failure of the left, which is now completely divided, will have 5 or 6 candidates and will not get 10%. I mean, the best one will not get 10% of the vote. But it's also the fact that historically the left has not been able to discuss frankly about this question of colonialism and the consequence of our colonial history on our society, and to recognize that our society is built in some way. Now you have 25–30% of the population who are from foreign origin. Of course, not only from North Africa, you have from Europe, you have from Africa, etc. But it's an important part of the population. And now more and more people are considering them as foreigners, not as French. You know, in France, when you are born in France, you have the French citizenship. So this is creating division as there is no, how to say, it's not the first time that you have this situation. We have the situation in the 30s with the extreme right, which was very strong in France. But in front of it, you have a very left-wing socialist and communist party who were able to not only to fight against fascism, but also to fight against racism, anti-Semitism, and to say, especially to the working class, that the enemy was not the foreigner, but the capitalist, etc. Today, you don't have this, so they have disappeared. And this is very worrying.
Absolutely, and this is something that's also not particular to France. Um, how can we what can we expect in terms of the upcoming elections, and whether there might be any movement or change from the current situation? Is it something that is going to reproduce the system, but in maybe in slightly different ways, or is there any hope that there would be a more, not necessarily radical, but some sort of change in policies towards migrants and non people that have been here for decades, and as we have discussed, but now are viewed as not French. Even in our basic conversations with people here, just coming here to see you, our driver who is from Morocco was telling us that whereas a few years ago racism seemed to be indirect and you felt it, but you didn't see it always. Today, it's much more direct. For instance, this sort of situation, is there any reason to believe that the next elections would do anything to something of the sort, or would it be more of the same, pending some sort of a movement on the left or otherwise?
I think it will be worse in some way. I mean, Eric Zemmour, as I said, who is a polemist, who is now candidate to the presidential election, has opened the ground, opened the floor to anything against the Muslim and racism, and even things for which he has been tried and condemned by the tribunals. But he has liberated the speech and saying, he's saying things that people will not dare to say before, that the Muslims were not French, that they were not integrating, etc., etc. And this is one of them. in the presidential election of 2017, when there was Macron and Fillon, who was from the right-wing party, Fillon was very hardliner about Islam. But to his credit, we must say that Macron hasn't accepted a debate about Islam. There was no debate about Islam in the presidential election in 2017. Now it's the central question, it's migration. And the fact that why now and why he has succeeded, there are many reasons. The role of, especially we have the equivalent of Fox News here now called C News, which is in the hand of Vincent Bolloré, who is buying a part of the press and who is extreme right. And he's not, he's not hiding. And this he has made from his television, which is small, but like Fox News, a kind of way where we must discuss what they say. And he has made of this question of grand remplacement of the Muslim, of security, the central question of the election. And this is very dangerous. At the end, we have three candidates which can go, in France we have first round and then second round with only two candidates. You have Macron, Valérie Pécresse, right wing, and probably Marine Le Pen or Éric Zemmour, this polemist. I don't think the extreme right can win, but their ideas are winning, and this is very worrying. What are the prospects? As I said, the left is divided. There is no candidate who is the most popular is what's his name? Mélenchon, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, but he will get 10% or 12% of the votes, and so we must be afraid that whoever win, he will win with a very right-wing discourse about Islam, about migrants, about security, etc., etc. Will this push the left wing to organize? And I am not sure, really. I'm not sure. The question of Islam has really divided the left wing. The left of the left. We have a part of the left who is very laïque in the bad sense of the word, saying, all religions are bad, but Islam, they are the real religion, and we must fight them, etc., etc. And this is a very dangerous trend.
Yes, it's interesting that I think the last time we interviewed you in 2005 or 6, we were working on a project on les banlieues de Paris, and it's very much the same themes, but of course with the benefit of a lot more migration, not least from Syria or other countries in the region and beyond. And it's interesting that the question of Islam is now, for instance, a bit more extant than it was in 2017. For the reasons you shared. The last question I would like to ask you or address is perhaps more conceptual, and it relates to the question of democracy in the West, in all of these words and quotation marks, democracy and the West. And there's been concern in progressive circles in the United States that democracy in the United States, as we knew it, is not what it was, or as they knew it, is not what it was. And this relates to questions of race and beyond, also economics and social class and so on. And there's been this idea that the authoritarian tendencies are beginning to emerge, along with the populist rise or the rise of the right wing and so on. Is there any type of discourse of the sort in France? Is there a concern about the question of quote unquote democracy itself and its foundations, or is it that these issues are subsumed under the other issues we've discussed?
No, there are questions about democracy, and especially in France. The political system of France is very particular because the president in France is a king. He can take any decision. It's not it's not a normal parliamentary system. And more we are going, and with the collapse of the political parties, we have a one-man system. I mean, he decides everything from the economic crisis to COVID to anything, and especially with the rise of terrorism and the threat of attack, etc. We have taken, France have taken a series of measures which are against liberties. I mean, exceptional law which are becoming the normal law. And this is worrying. I mean, it's a general trend, but it's linked also with the weakening of the traditional democracy. Traditional democracy in Western countries was built on political party, which has an ideology, which has membership, cells in the different town, etc., etc. Now you don't have any more political parties are very weakened. So one of the big excuse me, one of the big success of Macron is he was the man who made the normal political system implode. It was already in crisis, but you had always a socialist candidate, a right-wing candidate with extreme right from time to time. But now he made the system imploded, meaning there is no socialist party, and he has weakened the right-wing party. And this has created a situation where the normal way of functioning democracy is weakened. If you add to this the weakening of the trade unions, which has been, I mean, a project from the right wing and from capitalists for a very long time, but now they are very weak, the trade union, except in the public sector. And so people don't know how to make politics. There are thousands, 10,000 of organizations, local organizations on climate, on social problem, helping migrants, etc., etc. But there is no more any project. There is no more any hope. The only people who has a project is the extreme right. I mean, a project built on we against the other, we French people, white people against black, against Arab, etc., etc. And and a kind of nationalism which is chauvinism. It's not nationalism, which is a trend you can find in the United States, you can find it in Brazil, in Russia, etc., etc. So this is problematic. There are, people who want, and especially young people. I mean, I'm not only speaking of my generation, but who wants to reinvest politics. But till now, they haven't succeeded to build something which permit to have a political project. They have precise projects. You can have big mobilization on migrants, on nuclear, electricity, etc., etc. But nothing which unite, and this is a big problem for the future.
Last tangent on this question: how does the question of the issue of this redistribution or distribution of wealth affect these matters? In 2005, 6, and 7, we saw riots in Liban. Whether it was just about that or a combination of matters. What is the status of this question in France? In the United States, for instance, we are seeing bigger and bigger gaps. And I know that in France there are sort of checks and balances, more checks and balances against that in the socioeconomic situation. But as you were saying, in the political situation, it's the other way around, where executive power is more limitless than in other places, definitely the United States to some extent. So how does the question of social class and distribution of wealth affect these things?
Yeah, it's very important. It's very important to explain the collapse of the left. The fact that the left has been in power with François Hollande, especially 10 years ago, and had made a neoliberal policy, has completely not only discredited the left, but also cut the links between the Socialist Party and the left and the popular classes. This is very important. There is also the weakening of the Communist Party, which was very strong, meaning that in the popular towns and popular places, there is no more, the left is not present. And if it's present, people consider them not very different from the right wing. This is one of the reasons some right wing and even fascist developed, because they have a social discourse, like in some way you can find in United States and elsewhere. So I think this also is very important. The left has lost its relation with the popular class, not only in the discourse, but also as militants. Before, the militants of the Socialist Party and the Communist Party were linked with the trade unions, with the popular places. They had a local implantation, etc. Now this is finished. I mean, you see the leaders and the people who work for the Socialist Party. It's not different from the right wing. It's bourgeois. I mean, it can be progressive bourgeois, etc. But they have lost the contact with the popular classes. And the problem of how to bring back this contact is very difficult, because a part of this, the people think that to bring back the contact, we must be racist, or we must be anti-Muslim or anti-migrants, and this is what people want, etc. But in fact, we say very often that people are going to the right. I'm not so sure. I mean, it's also created. I mean, when you have all the media speaking about security every day and nobody speaking about social problem, it seems that as if everybody in France wanted to speak about security. But when you are in a period of calm without all this television, people say the most important thing for us is how to earn money, how to have better wages, etc.
Well, we have just a couple more minutes, and is there much to say about the question of French-Chinese relations in terms of what is happening in the world today, in terms of the attention that's being given to China and its rights, especially in the United States? Is there anything going on in that realm that is that you would like to address, or is it still not as mature of a topic?
No, there is a very strong pressure of United States on all Europe to make of China our main enemy. It's not only for us; it's also for Germany, etc., etc. And Europe is very reticent. They don't want to enter the Cold War with China, and they have economic relations, etc. But there are very strong pressure, and there is also an internal pressure. I mean, here you have now, like you have, and you have still, of course, a very strong anti-Russian media. You have now more and more the idea that China is a danger for us, and we must fight it. This is more at intellectual and media level, but it can play a role in the future. And I think it would be very dangerous to enter in this plot. I mean, of course, there is a problem. I mean, China has many problems, and we can condense its policy. But do we want relation with them, or do we want to prepare the next war? This is the question.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Alain. This has been, as usual, very insightful for me, and I'm hoping that we will always continue to speak with you. But I do get from you that if somebody's disillusioned with life in the United States as a result of all these issues on race, even gender and politics, that France might not be the best destination right now.
No, it's not. Unfortunately, it has been some time. I mean, and really, I miss the time when I went to the Middle East. People say you are French. They didn't ask me about which orientation, but it was so important that what France was for the Palestinian, for human rights, etc., etc. And I would like to go back to this time.
Well, we we all do at some level, and yes, I do hope that we can actually speak with you closer to the elections one more time,
Okay.
perhaps more virtually. Thank you so much for your time and for your generosity and for the cafe and the sweets and for hosting us at your home.
Thank you for coming here.
Thanks, Ella. Oh, and as I leave you, do you want to say something about the new project you launched?
Yes. Now, Orient 21 is eight. We are in the ninth year of Orient 21. And, I mean, the frontier of Orient are very where it stopped, where it began. But recently, we began to write about Sahel because France was involved and it was linked with Libya, Algeria, Morocco, etc., etc. And the article had were a big success. And from this time, we discussed with the people who wrote about this, and they were interested to try to launch something like Afrique XXI, but like Orient 21, but on Africa. And we began to launch it in September, October, and now we will launch it completely with one article every day in October. In January, there is a very good team of journalists very involved in Africa, and I think in France, perhaps more even than on the Middle East, there is people interested. I mean, first there is French African diaspora. I mean, people, millions of people living here, but also you have 25 or don't know 20 French-speaking country, and there are not many free media, independent media on this question. So we are very optimistic about the future of Afrique Inter.
That's great. And it has a separate URL. Is it
Yes, it's Afrique21
Afrique 21?
dot info.
Okay, this is wonderful.
21 first, like in
Roman.
Roman.
Yes.
And now a part of our public, they don't understand 21 because no, I mean, it's old.
They see it as X's and ones
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I's. Well, all right, this is great. We look forward to connecting with you on this question as well, both at the ASI and Jadaliya. We already have a good collaboration and we hope to continue it. Shukran.
شكرا
Ala.
لكم.
Shukran.